October of 1944, France. The Third Army had been advancing without interruption for 2 full months. Private First Class Raymond Kowalski had spent 4 consecutive days seriously ill. He was not injured in combat. He was suffering from severe sickness, vomiting, a high fever, unable to keep even water down. His sergeant believed exhaustion was the cause. The company medic suspected dysentery. Both were mistaken. The source was the meat. On October 9th, a field kitchen assigned to the 80th Infantry Division received a delivery of canned beef. Those cans had remained in transit for 11 days beyond the approved limit. 3 containers showed obvious swelling. A corporal named Denton, serving as the cook, reported the issue to his supply officer. The response was simple. He was instructed to distribute the food regardless. Denton followed the order. By October 11th, 26 soldiers from 3 separate companies had been evacuated with symptoms of food poisoning. 2 remained in a field hospital for 3 weeks. 1 would be absent from combat service for 6 weeks. None had been wounded. Every one of them became ill after consuming food issued by their own army. A lieutenant named Harris documented the incident and submitted the report through normal channels. The paperwork returned with a classification of administrative and nothing further. Harris made a duplicate copy. Instead of relying on the original route, he forwarded it through an entirely separate channel directly to the 3rd Army Inspector General. The report arrived at Patton's headquarters on October 14th. He reviewed it before breakfast. Patton had not reached the end of the Inspector General's report before taking action. By 10 o'clock that morning, he already had the name of the supply officer involved. By 11 o'clock, he had identified the division quartermaster who had approved the original shipment. Before noon, the complete chain of custody for the canned beef was on his desk. The records traced the shipment from the depot in Verdun to the field kitchen operating within the 80th Division sector, where it had ultimately been served. Patton examined every document. He noted every individual who had handled the shipment. He followed every transfer point. He marked each place where the problem should have been detected and stopped, but was not. The officer who ordered Corporal Denton to serve the swollen cans was Captain Aldrich. He had served with the division since the Normandy landings. His record contained no previous disciplinary actions. Before October 9th, he was generally regarded as an effective supply officer. He managed food distribution and equipment logistics efficiently. Reports were filed accurately. Deliveries moved forward as required. He was not known for creating problems that demanded attention from senior command. Then came the morning of October 9th. He looked directly at 3 cans of beef that were visibly swollen. In preserved food, swelling is a clear warning that the contents may have deteriorated and could be unsafe. He made a decision. He concluded that returning the shipment, completing the necessary paperwork, documenting the transit time violation, and requesting replacement supplies would create a greater inconvenience than the danger posed by serving the food. He weighed administrative effort against the well-being of the soldiers. The paperwork prevailed. It was a decision that resulted in 26 men being hospitalized and removed from combat service for periods ranging from 6 days to 6 weeks. That afternoon, Patton ordered Aldrich to headquarters. The meeting was brief. At no point did Patton raise his voice. Officers who were present later described it as the quietest formal reprimand they had ever witnessed. Several specifically remarked that the silence was more unsettling than any shouting could have been. There was no theatrical display. Patton spoke for roughly 4 minutes. His remarks followed 3 separate points, delivered one after another. When he finished, the meeting was over. The first point concerned operations. A soldier in a combat zone who cannot eat, cannot fight. A soldier unable to fight becomes a burden carried by every man serving beside him. By his own decision, Aldrich had created 26 such burdens. He had done so after seeing with his own eyes that the food he ordered distributed was compromised. The second point concerned command. Denton had reported the issue through the proper chain and to the appropriate officer. He had followed procedure exactly as required when he discovered the problem. Aldrich had used the authority of his rank to overrule that judgment simply to avoid additional paperwork. To Patton, this represented a breakdown of leadership at its most basic level. The third point was delivered in an even quieter tone. If one of those soldiers had died, Patton said, you would have faced trial for it. He advised Aldrich to consider carefully whether he wished to provide any reason for such a course to be pursued. Before that day ended, Aldrich was removed from his position as supply officer. He was transferred to a permanent administrative assignment in the rear areas. The new role carried no responsibility or authority involving food handling, acquisition, or distribution. For Patton, however, the matter did not end with Aldrich. In reality, it had only begun. The incident exposed deeper weaknesses within the system that had allowed the situation to develop. Patton shifted his attention to the quartermaster network itself. The canned beef that had sickened 26 soldiers had originated at a supply depot in Verdun. Before arriving there, it had passed through a shipping facility in Cherbourg. At the Cherbourg shipping point, the transit time for the shipment had been recorded incorrectly. Whether that error was intentional or simply a clerical mistake that moved through this process without correction, the result was the same. Beef that had exceeded its authorized transit period continued forward as though it remained within acceptable limits. That recording mistake marked the first failure in the system. It was not the last. From Cherbourg all the way to the field kitchen where Denton received the shipment, multiple individuals handled the cargo. At each stage, the discrepancy either went unnoticed or was ignored. The breakdown occurred repeatedly. The chain failed in several places and under several different hands, even though it should have stopped the shipment long before it approached any field kitchen. Patton responded by ordering a full audit of every food shipment moving anywhere within the Third Army supply structure. Every canned item and every preserved food product was included. Anything in transit, in storage, or awaiting issue across every unit under his command fell under review. He wanted actual shipping durations, checked against physical transportation records. He did not want reliance on log times that had already proven unreliable in at least one documented case. Any shipment that could not be validated through dependable documentation was to be destroyed before reaching a field kitchen. Patton demanded the results within 72 hours. The quartermaster officers who received the directive immediately understood its practical implications. During an active military campaign, it required personnel to be pulled away from other responsibilities throughout the logistics network. It meant working through multiple nights in the field without interruption. It also meant facing the possibility that the Verdun recording error was not unique. The same pattern might already have moved questionable food to other units operating in different sectors. Reports may not yet have appeared simply because no one had become ill enough to trigger one. Until evidence proved otherwise, that possibility had to be treated as a probability. The audit eventually identified 17 additional shipments containing transit time discrepancies, serious enough to require detailed examination and verification against physical records. Most were found to be within acceptable limits after review. 3 were not. 2 of those 3 shipments remained either in transit or inside depot storage facilities. Both were destroyed before reaching any field kitchen. The 3rd shipment had already been distributed in full to another division operating in an entirely separate sector of the front. Patton ordered an immediate recall. The recall was completed before any portion of the shipment was served. Afterward, he turned his attention to the 2 individuals who had acted properly. Lieutenant Harris had made a deliberate choice when he submitted a second report directly to the Third Army Inspector General. He did not rely solely on the divisional chain of command, which had already failed once. Harris recognized that the system around him had shown no willingness to address this urgent issue on its own. He therefore identified another path. That route led outside the failed process and toward someone who possessed both the authority and the determination to act on the information contained in the report. Harris had gone around the normal chain of command, but not because he was being insubordinate. He did it because he accurately understood what that chain had already done with the information the first time. He recognized that the issue was larger than 26 sick soldiers. The real problem was that compromised food had reached those men after multiple opportunities to stop it had already passed. Worse still, the same system had already demonstrated that it would classify the matter as administrative and continue on without further action. Patton did not award Harris a promotion. He did not issue a formal commendation. He did not recommend him for a decoration. Instead, the Inspector General's office placed a note in Harris's personnel file. The entry specifically recorded that Harris had shown sound judgment in handling an administrative matter under circumstances where the normal chain of command had proven inadequate in addressing a legitimate threat to the health and combat effectiveness of the soldiers under his responsibility. 3 words stood out in that record: sound administrative judgment. Years later, Harris admitted he never expected any response when he submitted the second report through the alternate channel. He filed it because he was angry. 26 of his men had become ill after eating food supplied by their own army, and the standard process had already shown him exactly how such information would be handled. He had not expected the report to reach anyone useful. He had not expected action, even if it did. The audit surprised him. The recall surprised him. The note placed in his file surprised him even more. Corporal Denton received something different. Patton instructed the Inspector General's office to send an official letter to Denton's commanding officer. The letter formally documented that Denton had followed proper procedure when he discovered the compromised cans and reported them to his supply officer on the morning of October 9th. It also recorded that his warning had been improperly overridden by a superior officer. That letter became part of Denton's service record. It was not an award. It was documentation. The record clearly stated that Denton had acted correctly and that someone above him had ignored that correct judgment. Many years later, Denton said he kept a personal copy of the letter for the remainder of his life, not because it changed what happened on October 9th. Nothing could alter the fact that 26 soldiers became sick from food he had served after receiving orders to do so. What mattered was something else. Someone with the authority to make it official had put the truth into writing. "I knew I was right when I reported those cans," he later said. What I didn't know until I received that letter was that the record would say I was right too. Private First Class Raymond Kowalski made a full recovery. He returned to his unit in late October, 6 days after being evacuated to the field hospital. At first, he knew only his own experience, 4 days of illness, the hospital, then the gradual recovery that allowed him to return to duty. Eventually, he learned the rest. The information traveled through the unit the way news often moves among soldiers, without official announcements and without formal transmission. It spread through conversation. The same method by which troops often learned what was actually happening around them. What Kowalski discovered exceeded his expectations. He learned what happened to Aldrich. He learned about the audit. He learned about the recalled shipment. He learned about the entries placed in the records of Harris and Denton. Years later, he reflected on what remained most memorable. It was not Aldrich's punishment, although he felt strongly that the outcome was justified. What stayed with him was the audit. The fact that someone with real authority had examined every food shipment moving through the entire Third Army supply network. The fact that the review had been conducted specifically to determine whether what happened to him and 25 other soldiers had already happened elsewhere or might soon happen to someone else. Most importantly, action had been taken before additional soldiers became sick. "That's what I remember most," he said. "Not the punishment, the checking." If you enjoyed this story and want more military history content told through real events and human decisions, be sure to follow for more. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.